Welcome to History for Granite. Join me to explore ancient Egypt. Please subscribe, and together we'll uncover secrets from the past written in stone. When studying ancient history, it's easy to fall victim to the mindset that some mysteries will forever be unsolvable. You witness what has fallen into ruin and believe there's no way to know what happened so long ago. It's true that we'll never reach 100% certainty with our interpretations. However, there's room for a lot more confidence than you might expect. One of the best things about studying the pyramids of ancient Egypt is how much evidence has survived over 4,000 years of time. While most temples have been leveled to their foundations, the pyramids stand tall and proud, protecting evidence throughout their chambers and superstructure. A particularly difficult mystery of the Old Kingdom is what might be called the three-pyramid problem of Pharaoh Sneferu. One king, three pyramids, no sarcophagus. There are many amazing things about this problem, but what I have found most astounding is how poorly modern Egyptology has attempted to resolve it. When alternative arguments that pyramids have nothing to do with burials are proposed, it's effective to point to the sarcophagus as evidence plainly in favor of a burial. Look at all these perfectly human-sized stone boxes, some of which have their former occupants' names inscribed upon them. Many of these sarcophagi are too large to have been brought into their chambers after construction. They are thus contemporary with the pyramids that were built around them. Then the alternative arguments get more ridiculous, such as the ancient Egyptians inheriting pyramids that were previously constructed for some forgotten purpose. Yet somehow the earliest pharaohs declined to claim the mightiest pyramids for themselves and instead stick to more modest accommodations. The alternative reasoning doesn't lead anywhere that follows common sense. If there's any one piece of evidence that firmly cements the pyramids as funerary monuments, it's the sarcophagus. So let me now underscore a critical point. Every king's pyramid in Old Kingdom Egypt has been found with a sarcophagus or fragments of one inside. That is, every pyramid except the three gigantic pyramids built for Pharaoh Sneferu. Even pyramids that have been mostly demolished always have pieces of a sarcophagus within them. Yet the Sneferu pyramids, which remain in relatively good condition, have never had a single fragment of a stone sarcophagus discovered inside. When confronted with this crucial fact, arguments put forth by Egyptologists become as ridiculous as the alternative crowd that denies their importance. For example, Mark Lehner claimed the upper chamber of the Meidum pyramid could itself function as the sarcophagus. He also proposed that the wooden beams in this chamber could have facilitated the removal of the sarcophagus, despite this never happening to other pyramids where it would have been far easier to accomplish. Everyone mentions that Flinders Petrie found pieces of wood in the Meidum pyramid, as if a wooden sarcophagus was a likely explanation when contemporary mastabas nearby have enormous stone sarcophagi. And most amusingly, in Mark Lehner and Pierre Tellet's recent book, it is suggested that a male skeleton found in the Red Pyramid might have belonged to Sneferu himself. We are to believe that all the stone floor and stone sarcophagus were systematically removed, while the pharaoh's fragile skeleton survived this campaign of destruction. You can tell that Egyptology is uncomfortable with the three-pyramid problem of Sneferu because extraordinarily low probability scenarios are presented to explain it. It would be far more honest to simply admit it's unknown why these three pyramids are lacking a sarcophagus, and that this is a mystery Egyptology has not resolved. Ultimately, it is the condition of the Red Pyramid's upper chamber that provides the most convenient excuse for Sneferu's missing sarcophagus. Many Egyptologists claim this is the chamber where Sneferu was ultimately buried.
The completed Red Pyramid was the first smooth-sided pyramid that really had been finished.
And that's the one that we think that the king was actually buried in.
And since the chamber's floor is now entirely missing, we can presume such an act totally destroyed the sarcophagus as well. This tidy explanation is terribly inadequate because it ignores the most important question. Why would anyone take such a great effort to destroy the entire chamber? We don't see anything like this at other pyramids, so what was different at the Red Pyramid? Egyptology has no answer for this. Fortunately for us, the three-pyramid problem of Sneferu will reveal a solution. We begin with the Bent Pyramid, a structure I've made numerous videos about, and probably the second most important pyramid of Egypt after the Great Pyramid. The upper chamber was discovered with a large massif of small bricks filling the lower half of the room. These bricks were removed in the late 1940s, and all that remains is the wooden falsework of logs that was once embedded within the bricks. Apparently, this infill of the upper chamber happened at least twice, based upon the remnants of 2 levels of floor pavement clinging to the walls. The reasoning for the redesign of this chamber is unclear, but it was a substantial renovation that doesn't appear to be the original construction plan. A small stone sarcophagus could hypothetically have been brought into the chamber from the western entrance, but there's no evidence this occurred. Presumably, the long timber was introduced into the upper chamber from that direction. Afterwards, the western entrance was plugged up and an access tunnel cut so the upper chamber was permanently accessible. A tunnel so small that no stone sarcophagus could ever pass through it from either direction. Next, let's visit the Pyramid of Meidum, widely accepted as the earliest of Sneferu's 3 enormous pyramids. The upper chamber of this pyramid is small, but despite its modest appearance, the ancient Egyptians seem to have obsessed over it in the strangest of ways. We owe our thanks to independent researcher Gilles Dormian for the only comprehensive study of this chamber published in his 2013 book on the Meidum Pyramid. Dormian's pyramid studies always conclude that hidden chambers lay uncovered because he is unable to align Egyptology's story of the pyramids with their architectural designs. My preferred approach is instead to come up with better explanations. In 1999, Dormian discovered corbelled weight-relieving spaces hidden above the flat ceilings of the 2 lower chambers. A small drilling and endoscope camera allowed visual inspection of these hidden areas. They seem well preserved and unremarkable at a glance, but by comparing them to the corbelled upper chamber, their significance comes into focus. The upper chamber is poorly constructed. The corbel overhangs vary wildly in their size. The corbels themselves do not align with each other, nor the masonry on the short walls of the room. Some corbels have chamfered edges. The corbels are only embedded into the south wall and poorly bonded with large gaps filled with patches and mortar. Dormian writes, quote, "Looking at this room, one would think that 4 teams were tasked with building it, but that each one built its own wall without worrying in the least about what the others were doing." End quote. The haphazard construction of this supposed burial chamber in the Meidum Pyramid has always been explained as a poor first construction attempt by the ancient Egyptians. But by comparing this chamber to the relieving spaces, we can see this is not a valid explanation. Most of the design flaws are not present in the relieving spaces, which show evenly sized and mostly symmetrical corbelling. The corbels match the adjacent wall courses and can thus be bonded with them. Notably, there are no patches or chamfered edges in the relieving spaces either. The relieving spaces are lower in the pyramid than the upper chamber and would have likely been constructed before it. Why would an alleged burial chamber for Sneferu be constructed with far less craftsmanship than empty voids merely designed to relieve the weight on chambers beneath them? In a previous video on the Meidum Pyramid, I highlighted how the lower chambers were more finely finished than the upper chamber and that their flat ceilings were probably designed to be the impressive-looking space. Whatever the upper chamber was built for, it would seem to have less importance than the lower chambers and relieving spaces constructed before it. But even though the upper chamber was made very poorly, the ancient Egyptians did not abandon it. At some point after the chamber was completed, renovations occurred to compensate for its poor quality. First, we notice all the patches inserted into the walls of this chamber. Dormian writes, quote, "These inclusions are obviously repairs, bandages applied to defective parts of the masonry. They repair and mask ugly defects at characteristic points, very open joints and chipped corners resulting from the use of imperfectly squared blocks with rough or chipped edges and corners." End quote. The patchwork suggests the corbels were not originally made with squared blocks. This is corroborated by the highest corbels having the roughest edges, because the gap between them is too narrow to reach in and smooth down afterwards. Furthermore, the chamfered corbels are probably the result of repair work as well. If a corbel is too irregular or too damaged to make perfectly square, these sharp but tapered edges are an aesthetic compromise. Dormian writes, quote, "Everything appears as if the Egyptians' initial intention had been to create a random room for which it was not necessary to take care of the work, and that they then decided to make it a more noble chamber requiring the restorative finishing." End quote. There is one more crucial aspect to observe about this upper chamber, and this is the condition of the floor. Dormian points out that the chamber itself is cut down into the bedrock about 60 centimeters below the base of the pyramid. We know this because a small excavation on the south wall reveals the pyramid is built on higher ground than the chamber. But Dormian does not believe this is how the chamber was originally constructed, and that the extra 60 centimeters of depth was added afterwards as part of the renovation. In support of this idea, he observes how the bottom course of the chamber is made of smaller and irregular blocks, which bite into the larger stones on the course above them. This is the opposite of the standard building practice of the ancient Egyptians, which was to make higher courses of stone fit by biting downwards into stones already laid into place. Dormian also observes the pavement in the chamber to be entirely unique. The chambers of 4th Dynasty pyramids are normally paved with enormous slabs set against the walls. If any gaps are left between the large perimeter slabs, they are filled in with small spacers. You can see this pattern clearly in the lower chambers of the Meidum Pyramid and the Red Pyramid. The upper chamber of the Meidum Pyramid, however, is not paved this way. It is instead tiled with smaller and regularly sized square blocks. The kind of blocks that could be brought into the chamber after it had already been constructed. It could be that the ancient Egyptians wanted to make the upper chamber taller, in addition to the other aesthetic adjustments made to its walls and corbels. Why such changes would be made is elusive, but the physical evidence clearly favors a renovation of the upper chamber of the Meidum Pyramid. Finally, the three-pyramid problem leads us to the Red Pyramid. Here the upper chamber is in ruin, and this is where most Egyptology books claim the great pharaoh Sneferu was buried. Perhaps one can excuse the Meidum Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid lacking a sarcophagus if one imagines this chamber contained it before being ripped apart. This is the story that has been told over and over, that the Red Pyramid was the ultimate triumph of design and accomplishment. Look at these razor-sharp corbels, symmetrical and straight, towering above. Who could argue that this does not represent the final achievement of a pharaoh in search of perfection? It's amazing to me how powerful such stories are, the inertia of conventional wisdom in our modern era. Once you hear the same explanation over and over, it's very hard to imagine something different. Even my most skeptical viewers would probably admit this channel has made breakthroughs in understanding the Old Kingdom pyramids of Egypt. So let me underscore a critical point about this journey. The most difficult part of discovery is letting go of the bias imparted by all the researchers that came before. The physical clues themselves are often sitting in plain sight. It's just that we lack the context of the ancient past to properly understand them. Our modern conceptions are often so prejudiced that we can't see what should be plainly obvious. Here, in the upper chamber of the Red Pyramid, is one such case. Literally every source that discusses this chamber states that it was ransacked by treasure hunters in the ancient past. It has been impossible to evaluate it without that preconceived notion. And yet, it is crystal clear that no other pyramid chamber was dismantled so dramatically. Pyramid plundering doesn't look like this, ever. So how can we reconcile that glaring discrepancy? We are left to believe here there must have been the most motivated and terribly confused band of looters of all time. But even the most ignorant gang of treasure seekers in ancient Egypt would know much about the pyramids that eludes the loftiest scholars of Egyptology today. One of those two groups was wrong about this chamber, and I think we can probably guess who. The upper chamber has been entirely dug out to a depth of 4 to 5 meters, and this material was almost entirely removed from the pyramid. John Perring's drawings from 1842 confirm this, as his sketches have proven to be similarly accurate with such details. The amount of debris on the floor in the middle chamber is a small fraction of the material that would have to come from this large excavation. In fact, there was more debris in the first chamber, which probably came from the outside. Curious visitors climbing down the descending passage would continually push loose stones and sand into that space. Treasure seekers don't clean up after themselves, so what can explain all the missing material from the upper chamber? Remember that people have been entering pyramids for thousands of years, and sometimes this uncertainty is used to excuse an absence of evidence. Here in the pit of the upper chamber, we clearly see two separate excavations. The small breach under the north wall is much more recent, as observed by the white limestone that is not stained like the rest of the chamber. It is the original excavation which reveals what happened to the Red Pyramid, and so let's take a closer look than anyone has before. The original elevation of the floor would have been here, along with the passage to the chamber, which was also excavated. We can't know for certain how thick the fine pavement layer would have been, but the lower chambers have thick slabs, and so that is the safest assumption. One could imagine this pavement level extending down to where the rougher blocks appear, clinging to the walls and surrounding the pit. When you take a step back and look at the big picture, what is remarkable is how the floor was removed, and yet none of the walls were originally damaged. Walls are usually the first area trial digging takes place, and yet here it was conspicuously avoided. Then when you look at the walls themselves, something even stranger starts to emerge. The remaining stone clinging to the walls was not hacked away carelessly. In fact, it has been carefully dressed from the top down along the entire perimeter. This is most clear in the passage, where a few sections were dressed to perfectly match the smooth plane of the upper wall. Look at this dressing line in the chamber, under the missing floor that would have originally obscured the walls. This is not a finished dressing line that once fitted against pavement. Rather, it's the exposed wall being dressed to match the wall above it. In fact, every bit of this chamber and passage show great care was taken to preserve the walls. The finest work is always at the top, and the chamber looks exactly how you would expect it to if it were the builders themselves reshaping the room. Look at this beautifully sharp corner at the chamber threshold. Can anyone believe that looters transported this massive amount of material while never damaging the corner, blocking the path to its removal? Here at the Bent Pyramid's connecting tunnel, you can see what happens to a corner when transporting materials. Unless the corner is intentionally protected, it's very convenient to hack it away. Even the passage to the Red Pyramid's upper chamber was protected, with the excavated lower area holding the last bit of undressed stone to protect the walls while excavation was underway. Nothing about this evidence is indicative of looting. All signs point towards a chamber renovation that was never completed. Everyone has assumed this pit was made by plunderers because they couldn't imagine Sneferu would do this to his own pyramid. This is compounded by Egyptology's narrative that the Red Pyramid was the only successful monument in the three-pyramid problem. I've previously demonstrated that story to be false, but even if you disagree, let me ask this question. If we know Sneferu renovated the Meidum Pyramid upper chamber, and he renovated the Bent Pyramid upper chamber, is it really so hard to believe that he was renovating the Red Pyramid upper chamber as well? As the old saying goes, fool me once, shame on Sneferu. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me thrice, well, you ain't gonna fool me again. Why Sneferu would drastically redesign the upper chamber of each pyramid may be lost to us, but I suspect that his three-pyramid problem was solved by his son Khufu. It may be that in the early years of pyramid building, the role of a pyramid was not firmly established. Perhaps it was changing even as Sneferu's pyramids were being constructed, and this is why they were all being redesigned shortly thereafter. Lacking a sarcophagus and perhaps any intent of being buried in these pyramids may have allowed Sneferu the freedom to be bold with his renovations. Remember, there's no evidence the Red Pyramid had any obstructions from the entrance. It may have always been accessible. Such a monument would never be attacked this way by ancient looters. The idea of a hidden burial in an open structure may have been entirely preposterous. If the Red Pyramid was undergoing renovations that were never finished, this may explain the rest of its incomplete design. For the Red Pyramid has no causeway, no stele, no satellite pyramid, the faintest of enclosure walls, and barely a temple on its eastern side. If any of Sneferu's pyramids was a failure in its time, the Red Pyramid is the most probable candidate. In fact, such a failure would explain the pristine condition that we find the Red Pyramid in today. The excellent condition of its corbels has always given the Red Pyramid the appearance of superior craftsmanship when compared to the Bent Pyramid. However, the corbels in the Great Pyramid's Grand Gallery have not held up well either. This is not due to structural problems or inferior engineering, but rather the effects of human activity. The atmospheric agents of moisture and salt emitted by visitors gradually damages the limestone walls, most apparently on the sharp corners of a corbelled ceiling. Evidence suggests the cult of Sneferu worshipped at the Bent Pyramid for nearly 1,000 years. If dramatically more human activity occurred within the Great Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid since they were constructed, this may explain why the Red Pyramid's interior has been better preserved. Indeed, who would want to worship in a chamber that looks like this? And so perhaps very little time was spent by humans inside the Red Pyramid during antiquity. The Great Pyramid is also clearly an evolution in design from the chambers of the Bent Pyramid complex, and not the Red Pyramid. The Red Pyramid architecture was a dead end for the ancient Egyptians. However, modern scholars have struggled to overcome their bias about the shape of the Sneferu pyramids, and this has caused enormous confusion about them. Here's Egyptologist Glenn Godenhoe confirming this phenomenon.
It's what you call a perfect pyramid, the one that conforms to what we think of as a pyramid the most.
But it's not what we think about pyramids that matters. It's what the ancient Egyptians thought, which guided their decisions and is revealed to us by the physical evidence. If every pyramid is imagined as King Tut's tomb, it's no wonder why Egyptologists haven't been able to work out their true history.
The floor of this chamber is completely dug up, and I can't think of any reason why an ancient Egyptian would want to do this unless it's to find hidden treasure.
It's more likely that there was never any treasure in the Red Pyramid, and that it was far from the perfect structure presented by Egyptology. Why 3 of Sneferu's pyramids were being renovated is a question that isn't answered, but it's what the physical evidence clearly shows. The 3-pyramid problem for the ancient Egyptians was ultimately solved by the Great Pyramid, regardless of if Sneferu never completed his vision. I suspect the air channels of the Great Pyramid were a solution devised from experience at the Bent Pyramid. After the Bent Pyramid's western entrance was sealed, its upper chamber would have trapped moisture, heat, and smoke more than any other chamber. The remedy was ingenious air channels, which were so successful that they are still relied upon in the modern era to keep the Great Pyramid cool and fresh. And who knows, maybe this even explains the renovation at the Red Pyramid. The upper chamber passage was expanded and its chamber lowered, which, if completed, would have helped to circulate air towards the pyramid entrance. Whatever the reason, nothing about the way this chamber was excavated points towards tomb robbery. Now, with that spell broken, the real history of the pyramids is a little more clear. Wherever Sneferu ended up being buried, it certainly wasn't this unfinished pit. I have my suspicions about where it might be. After all, a granite sarcophagus is a really big clue. The 3-pyramid problem of Sneferu may itself be a modern misconception of a problem that never existed in the first place. All of the Sneferu pyramids were successfully constructed, but perhaps none were ever considered as a location for a burial. For hundreds of years after the 4th dynasty, the nobility of Egypt chose the Great Pyramid as the most popular monument to be buried next to. In contrast, Sneferu's pyramid plateau is mostly devoid of later tombs. If we listen to what the ancient Egyptians were telling us by their actions, the monuments of Sneferu aren't so problematic after all. The only problem was overcoming the bias of past research to see what is clearly visible in the present. And each time we do this, our confidence about ancient history gets a little bit stronger. Thanks to everyone who watched this video to the end. Please subscribe to the channel to see more of this content. Give a like or comment as you see fit. And above all, remember to ask your friends if they take their history for granted.